Hey Reddit, I'm a long-time lurker, but this one is too good not to share. I spent a year working under the absolute worst boss imaginable. Let's call him Dan. He ran the team like a tyrant, made our lives miserable, and thought he was untouchable. Spoiler? He wasn't. This is the story of how I got him blacklisted from the industry and watched his whole career go down in flames. I'd been dying to get into this industry, and landing a job at one of the top agencies was a dream come true. It was my big break, my finally made it moment. But as soon as I started, things went downhill fast. Dan ran our team, and he was the kind of boss who made Gordon Ramsay look like Mr. Rogers. He'd assign deadlines that were impossible to hit, then berate us for not meeting them. He'd publicly humiliate anyone who asked for help, took credit for everything we did, and had this obnoxious habit of dangling promotions that never actually happened. After about 3 months, it was clear the job was toxic. I figured I'd just keep my head down, work hard, and maybe get promoted into another department. But things got worse. Here's where the story really starts. Dan loved to play mind games. He was a master manipulator who pitted employees against each other and punished anyone who questioned him. Once, he assigned a high-profile project to a co-worker, let's call her Jess, promising her a huge bonus if she did well. Jess worked insane hours to meet his impossible standards, and when she succeeded, Dan swooped in and took all the credit. She didn't see a dime of that bonus. Then he fired her, said she wasn't a good fit. Over time, I noticed a pattern. If anyone started asking questions or getting too much recognition, he'd do everything he could to sabotage them until they either quit or got fired. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells, trying not to piss him off. It didn't help that he had no problem taking credit for everything. We'd work around the clock on a campaign, and he'd present it to the board like it was his baby. One of my teammates joked that if we ever made a single mistake, he'd throw us under the bus faster than we could say career growth. Little did we know that joke would become a prophecy. The breaking point came when he handed me and my team a massive project with a tight deadline. He told us we'd get a big fat bonus if we nailed it. So we gave it everything we had. We were pulling late nights, early mornings, barely saw our families. We nailed it. But guess what? Dan took all the credit. Again. And when I asked about the bonus, he smirked and said, "The satisfaction of a job well done should be enough for you." That was it. I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let this guy ruin any more careers. If he wanted a fight, he was about to get one. My first step was gathering evidence. I started saving every email, every Slack message, every ridiculous request he made. I also got in touch with Jess and a few other former employees. They had horror stories of their own, so we pooled our evidence together. One of them even had recordings of him yelling at people in meetings and calling them idiots and morons. Then I did something Dan never would have expected. I went to a lawyer. I didn't want to get fired, but I needed advice. The lawyer suggested I document everything and reach out to the company's board anonymously. She even recommended a few online whistleblower programs if I wanted to go that route. With the legal advice in hand, I knew I could pull this off. I put together a dossier of evidence. It had everything. Proof of verbal abuse, shady expense reports, documents that showed him embezzling client funds for personal expenses. He actually used the company card to pay for a weekend getaway with his mistress. Real classy, right? Then I sent the dossier to HR and the board, anonymously, of course. They suspended him. We all thought that was it. But somehow Dan weaseled his way back, claiming it was a witch hunt orchestrated by a few disgruntled employees. He even went around the office saying, "They tried to take me down, but I'm untouchable." Big mistake, Dan. Challenge accepted. I realized I'd have to go bigger. So I reached out to a journalist who covered our industry. They were thrilled to hear about the story. The journalist interviewed several ex-employees anonymously and published a scathing exposé detailing everything Dan had done, from his harassment to his manipulation to his misuse of company funds. The article blew up. Clients started pulling their contracts. Dan's name was dragged through the mud on every industry forum. And the best part, he couldn't trace any of it back to me. Dan's position was hanging by a thread, but he was still trying to salvage it. That's when I decided to hit him with the final blow. I remembered an old project Dan had done, where he'd signed a client contract and forged their signature to get the deal approved. It was a major ethical breach, and if it ever got out, he'd be toast. Lucky for me, I had a copy of that contract. I sent it to HR and the board, along with a message saying, "If you let this man stay in power, this company is doomed." They scheduled a meeting to confront him with the evidence, and I got several of my co-workers to testify against him. It was the last straw. He was fired on the spot and blacklisted from the industry. No one would touch him with a 10-foot pole. In the weeks that followed, I watched as Dan tried to salvage his reputation. He blamed everyone but himself. He sent me an anonymous message on LinkedIn, yeah, real subtle, saying I ruined his life. I replied, "No, Dan, you ruined your own life. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." My co-workers and I celebrated that night. A few months later, I got a promotion. My new boss, actually a decent person who appreciated the work we did. It felt weird to be respected again, but I wasn't complaining. This experience taught me a lot about standing up for myself and not letting toxic people walk all over me. Sometimes people like Dan think they're untouchable because they're good at playing office politics. But when you hit them where it hurts with the truth, they don't stand a chance. To anyone dealing with a boss like Dan, keep your head up, gather your evidence, and don't let them win, because sometimes karma needs a little push.